So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Max E. And usually, when people are talking about Max E, it's for the most part pretty emotionally charged. But today we're going to be looking at Max E pretty objectively. So, to do this, we're going to break down the math. So, yeah, I've started a bit of a spreadsheet here, not extremely labeled, I guess, but it'll do the job. And also, some of the math might be a little bit off, so some of the numbers are kind of perhaps a little bit off, but in general, this should make sense, right? So I do not have the statistics for Maxi, but you can still calculate the probability of things uh, when dealing with Maxi. So that is what this is going to be all about here. So if we look at this line right here represents the odds of you actually seeing Maxi in your opening hand. And the basis of this is we're doing essentially 100 games. So if we play 100 games in 34 of those games, you will see Maxi. In 66 of those games, you will not even see the Maxi. And this is just going by probability, right? So not just hard statistics, because I don't have this raw data right now, but this is still a pretty accurate way to evaluate Maxi, I would say. And then this is the probability for opening Ash Blossom slash Called by the Grave. So to explain these probabilities further, Maxi is going to be assumed to be 3 of your cards in 40. Ash Blossom Called by would be like 5 in 40, right? So there is a 50.66% chance for you to actually see Ash Blossom slash Called by the Grave, which is going to be about a 17.10%, I think, right? Is that exactly what it is? Yeah. 17.10% chance that you see Ash Blossom or Called by over just seeing Maxi. So inherently right now, if we just look at this part of um, the math, the odds of getting Maxi is already lower than getting Ash Blossom slash Called by the Grave. And of course, we're only using Ash Blossom Called by because it's easier to visualize this way, I guess. But there's still yet more cards that you can play to deal with Maxi specifically, right? And then there's like aspects like playing strategies that aren't even affected by Maxi, which uh, goes outside the scope of the scope of the current math we have here, right? And then this is the probability that we see Ash Blossom, Called by, and Maxi. So that's 17.10% chance. And then probability of seeing a Maxi and your opponent not having Ash Blossom or Called by the Grave. And this simply means that you can expect Maxi to resolve, assuming your opponent is playing Ash Blossom and Called by, about 16.65225% here. There's actually rounding on this, right? But yeah. So 16.65225%, if we were to just round this up, this would be about a 1 in 5 games where there's going to be Maxi resolving and your opponent also just having no response. But then this is not the full equation, right? We still have to actually halve this because you could argue Maxi is actually a completely useless card going first. So Maxi will objectively always be a dead card in your hand if you are going first, right? Because a lot of the mentality that goes behind Maxi, people value Maxi a little bit too much. So you're likely to hold onto a Maxi, like no matter what, at least one copy of Maxi, right? So when you see someone discard Maxi, for example, on the first turn, that just simply means they have a second Maxi, right? But the reason is because people overvalue Maxi a bit, right? So high probability for that to occur, and you have to ask yourself, do you actually, like, after resolving your combo, do you need the Maxi? Does the Maxi actually do that much? In comparison to, let's say, Infinite Impermanence, Called By, Effect Veiler, just any of those cards. Like, those would get the job done more than Maxi in shutting down whatever your opponent has done, right? Or is attempting to do. So in that case, we have a lot more value going on here. And the important thing to note about Ash Blossom and Called By is that uh, the odds of getting hit by Ash Blossom and Called By do not apply to any cards or hand traps aside from specifically Maxi. So if we do the probabilities on Ash Blossom and your opponent having an out for Ash Blossom, at best it's going to be 33.75% that they open into something that can deal with your Ash Blossom or your Called By specifically, or not Ash Blossom. They open Called By or cross out to be able to negate your Ash Blossom. So that is 3 cards at best. And if we go to Effect Veiler, if your opponent's not running Effect Veiler or Gamma, for example, well, actually, Gamma's not a good example, but in this case, then your opponent only has probably exactly Called By to actually negate whatever hand trap you're playing, which is a 1 in 40 chance to just like open that. And I believe mathematically that is like somewhere around the ballpark of 10% chance of opening that every single game. So, uh, notably with Infinite Impermanence, that's where that applies, I guess, right? If your opponent can only cross out you, that is like somewhere around 15%. I'm not really doing the math right now, but yeah. The odds of getting hit by counterplay if you play Maxi, much, much higher. And if we just assume Maxi is just an auto win, this data is actually not going to be correct because you will probably win going first anyway. So Maxi, if it resolves on the second turn after you full combo, honestly, doesn't really matter. Like, you could argue it feels bad, but does it really matter? Most of the time, I have not seen it matter. It matters like maybe 10% of the time, unironically, where you can actually play around a board, but your opponent just plays Maxi. And then on top of that, they have to actually draw into something that's actually usable, like a Nibiru, which is not actually that likely. I believe that if we use this data, it's probably like, at best, like, if we're considering a 1 of Nibiru, it's like, what, 10 to 20%, so around the 15% range once again, that your opponent actually draws into Nib in like 5. Like, on your like 5th summon, your opponent has Nib in one of their 5 draws. That's just unlucky if you get Maxied and you break a board. And that happens. Literally unlucky. Not much else to say. And you couldn't get lethal in like 4 summons, so happens, I guess. But yeah. Since Maxi is actually a useless card, honestly, going first, well, in my opinion, we could just take this number here, and then, wait, okay, I have to not copy the percent there, okay, so we just take this number, and I'll just take this and get this helped, and we have this lovely number, so we have 8.32%. So let's put a percent here, and boom. We're at about 8.33% chance to arguably win the game. So we're going to round this up, right? Let's assume Maxi actually does automatically win us the game if it resolves, which is truly not the case, right? If we assume this is the case, though, this could be approximately 1 in 10 games then being auto won by Maxi. Is your 1 in 10 games actually worth for Maxi here? Assuming Maxi is actually a legitimate auto win here. So, is that actually useful? Well, I would argue for the most part, no, right? It's just one in 10 chance to quote unquote automatically win. I hate it when it does that. So 1 in 10 chance to uh win the game, right? So that means you could argue that the other 9 games that we play here, it's doing nothing. So in our data set here that we're building up, I guess, well, not really data set, this is more like math, probability math. But that would make us in these like 100 games see 10 games where we win off of Maxi, and then the other 90 we would not see anything like super relevant or like Maxi doing anything super big in particular. And this is just based off of looking at Maxi alone, right? For the most part. Well, with the math is mostly going to be focused around Maxi. It can be a little bit more complicated once we start factoring in all the other cards. So if we want to do it by like format or by matchup, it would take me a little bit more time to calculate. But for the most part, is Maxi really that good of a card? Like with this math here, it just doesn't seem like it's that good for me. And even if we were to use the other number, that would only be two. Uh, well, assuming you also magically automatically win duel if you resolve Maxi going first, then Maxi you could round this up to back to 16% here, and we could that's still not quite 2 out of 10 games, but we could round it up as such. So would 2 out of 10 games be worth it still? But like still a little bit questionable, right? 2 out of 10 games. So that is no bueno, in my opinion. Just 2 out of 10 games, is that great? That is probably the amount of games you are winning if you were playing like Blue Eyes. 2 out of 10. And honestly, I'm not sure if you are winning 2 out of 10 games, or 1 out of 10. Like honestly, this is looking like some Blue Eyes win rate. And so stop doing that. Okay. So are we really going to sit here and just say that Maxi is completely broken here? It's not as though Maxi has no like counterplay and the odds are in the favor of whoever is playing Maxi, because it is actually the reverse that would be true, because that means if your opponent is inversely playing Maxi, they're kneecapping themselves a little bit in certain regards. So notably because Maxi is going to be held whenever you're playing it, right? This probability, you can reconsider this as actually odds of drawing a brick going first. And in case you're wondering about like if you want to consider opening one card, like the 2 copies of one card, so like 2 copies of Maxi in your opening hand, the odds of that is about like 1% ish, so somewhere between 1 to 2%. So that this is usually why you would run Garnets at 2, just in hopes of not drawing both, So just for example, with Mecha Fan Beast, you can run Lion at 2 to kind of reduce those odds a bit, because there's normally like a 10% chance you would auto lose the game, and now it's like 9% less if you run 2 copies, so that's great. Math gets you a long way. But we can also look at this data in like different ways, right? If we open Maxi, there's a 33.75% chance that we do so, right? And then there's also subsequently a little above 50% chance that our opponent actually will have the out to Maxi. In fact, I believe this number is actually if you were playing cross out, from what I recall, right? So it's closer to 60% in this case. But that means essentially if you have Maxi, you flip a coin, your opponent has those odds. If you let's say if you flip heads or tails, it's just 50-50 if your opponent has like Ash Blossom or Called By. So half the time. I don't really have a good visual for this, but half the time your opponent has Ash Blossom or Called by the Grave when you do have Maxi. And also half of the time your opponent will have Ash Blossom or Called by. Oh, and just for fun, we can also use this math to prove how crappy Ninja is because of how destroyed you get by Ash Blossom Joy Spring, which has less counterplay than uh, Maxi. So unlucky, I guess. But okay, if we look at this data, we can just concretely say that Maxi winning games and being broken and the aspects to it. If we go deeper into the math, I'm sure that we can mathematically prove Maxi is not actually that bad. So the bigger question is like, is Maxi too unfun to play against? Like, it too unfun? Is it maybe um too much RNG? Well, the RNG is mostly not in the favor of whoever is running the Maxi, honestly. So you're you're fine in that regard. So it feels bad, I guess, when someone maxis you, but is that really justification? Like, you could say, oh, they killed by my Ash Blossom Geospring, killed by what a broken, disgusting card, you know? You could say that, right? But is it certifiably true or more like emotional in the moment? And it's kind of just, can you prove it with probability, right? That the called by is actually disgusting. Like, probably not, I'd say, right? And then the other aspect here, the final one, I think that's the most impactful is how Maxi actually affects deck building. So if we run uh, Maxi, right, you do still, of course, need the Ash Blossom and Called By to negate Maxi. Otherwise, the probability skyrockets to just 16.65% that your opponent can just drop Maxi on you and it just resolves, assuming we play like no cards that can play into like Max or can deal with Maxi for us, right? So no Ash Blossom, no Cubline, nothing like that. Probability just goes off a cliff here, you could argue, right? So 16.65% and then 33.75% our opponent opens this. That means about like 1/3 of your games you would have to deal with Maxi, just either going first or second. You're always going to have to deal with it, assuming you just don't yeah, Ash Blossom slash Called By, right? So in this case, uh yeah, you're pretty boned, but considering like Master Duel is also best of one, is it really that bad that our decks become a little more predictable? So if we're at least at minimum always running Ash Blossom or Called By, we can always expect this. If we're uh, dealing with too many variables, the game just can become kind of unfun as well in a regard, right? Like, for example, when we have Crossout, if we just don't know if our opponent is going to be running like any given card, it'll be fairly frustrating for us to like be unable to cross out something, considering cross out is a one-off, right? Just for example, it goes a bit deeper than this, but it also matters in like how we set things up and how we deal with other things. So another aspect of dealing with like Maxi, let's say the Maxi player is going first. You know what would be better than Maxi and potentially even more game winning? Solemn Judgment, and Solemn Judgment does not even have card once per turn, right? So if we open 2 or 3 Solemn and just full combo, we can just Solemn 2, 3 times, and then our opponent will probably be completely screwed against whatever our combo is. So that's a little bit of something to think of, right? If Maxi does get banned as well, like what could we just assuming we still play Ash Blossom Called By, just but wouldn't it be more frustrating to get Solemn 3 times in a row? And speaking of which, do you guys remember that really, in my opinion, unfun festival where we were dealing with going first decks and going second decks? So your deck would specifically be a going first deck if you're going first, and going second deck if you're going second, right? Every single going first deck ever just put in like 3 Solemn, and it's not punishable at all because the drawback to Solemn is usually that if you go second, it's just not a good card. It it would take too long to get online or get value out of if you had solemn judgment and you were going second, right? But if you're always going first, it comes a completely insane cracked card, right? And you're just hoping to draw like however many solemns, right? So super annoying in that regard as well. But like there's also the benefit of just having, of course, Ash Blossom called by, and always being able to expect your opponent to have Ash Blossom called by or Maxi, and not have to wonder like what dumb uh trigger your opponent is kind of holding on to. Is there some really dumb hand traps, like just for example, Block Kinetic Puppeteer? That is actually a legitimate, almost usable hand trap against specifically Code Talkers and like some Cyberse decks. Not necessarily all of them, but it sure does work. Sometimes, not even all the time, but like sometimes. So pretty dumb, but if it works, it works, I guess. Like you could block the transcode zone by moving link decoder over, for example. Or if transcode is in the main monster zone, you can move it like all the way to the edge of the board, so it has nowhere to summon to. Well, yeah, something dumb like that. No material, uh, and like other cards, like other dumb triggers. I mean, there's also the fact that my math could be like a smidge off, but for the most part, it shouldn't be too bad, right? So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.